A business can still win the opportunity and still fail the environment it just entered. And this is the risk that most leaders miss. Your team already had clients in the space, some relationships moved, and revenue came in, and enough work to make the expansion feel proven. But that's where this gets dangerous, because a leader can find that out late, not when the direction is approved, not when the early relationships make the move feel proven, and not when the first signs of momentum show up. But once the work is live and the team is inside it, the business starts getting measured against the standard that the other environments already operate in. And that's where this exposure begins. I spent 23 consecutive years in the top 1% of wealth management as an advisor, leader, and executive, building and running multi-billion-dollar businesses. Today's video is about why an expansion plan failed because the leader did not fully evaluate what the business would have to support once the work became real. And you'll see what was missed before the direction moved forward. Not the opportunity, but the standard attached to it. And finally, I'll show you the judgments that matter and why the leader didn't just misread the work. They misread what the direction would cause the business to become. And here's how it usually starts. The expansion did not feel like transformation. It felt like extension. You had relationships in the space already. Your team had touched the work, and some revenue had moved. So when more than opportunities started showing up, it did not feel like you were entering something completely different. It felt like you were putting more direction behind something the business already had some experience with. And early on, enough happened to support that belief. New conversations started, some clients engaged more deeply, and advisors you had could point to the relationships they already knew. Even your partner showed interest because the direction made sense. But nothing in that early motion told you the business was not ready. But then the work got deeper. The conversations started moving differently. The clients that you brought in were not just asking whether the team could help. They were measuring how the team thought, how quickly it could respond, and whether it could operate cleanly around the other professionals already close to the relationship. And that's where the difference started showing, not as a major failure, but it started showing up gradually in the way decisions started moving back to you. The conversations that should have stayed inside a team now need more senior judgment. You had to have more coordination that took more effort before the client experience felt clean. And over time, the work started gathering around the people who could hold the standard instead of spreading through the business the way the expansion required. And your business was no longer being evaluated against what made it successful before. It was being evaluated against the standard the environment already operated at. And this is where your team starts seeing the difference too. Not as a resistance, but as recognition. They started to realize that the business was not built to support this work the way the environment already expects it to be supported. The services being provided were not as deep as the expansion assumed. And the speed of the work required is not fully built into the business. And too much still has to move back to you before decisions can happen clearly. And issues that should have been understood before launch now require your involvement to protect the relationship. And that's when the questions start quietly forming. Will we actually prepare for this? And that's your signal. The expansion is not naturally integrating. It's just being manually carried. Now here's the parts that matter. What actually was happening? The first thing you misread was what the existing relationships actually proved. Yes, your team had clients in or near the segment, so it felt like the business already understood the space. But those relationships had not been fully tested against the standard attached to it. They had not been tested against advice sophistication required when the work became deeper. They had not tested pricing when value was being compared by clients already used to operating at that level. And they had not tested how much influence other professionals would still hold around the relationship. And that's why the proof felt stronger than it really was. The second thing you did not fully prepare for was the level the work would operate at once it arrived. Because your focus stayed on whether the opportunity made sense, whether the market for it existed, whether the team could win business there, and whether the direction could add revenue. But the deeper questions was not whether the opportunity was real. It was what the business would have to become once the opportunity stopped being occasional exposure and started becoming part of the model. You assumed that coordination would extend and that credibility would carry and that your existing business would absorb the lift. But this type of environment was already operating at a different level, not because anyone was making unreasonable demands, but because that's how the work already functions there. The third thing you misread was what the direction would cause the business to become. And this was not just a higher operating standard. It changed where credibility had to be proven, how quickly value had to be compared, and how much influence other professionals had around the client. And it changed how fast decisions came back to you when the business could not carry the work cleanly. So the opportunity moved forward before the full cost of carrying it at that level was visible. Not just an effort, but an escalation, in exposure, in your involvement, and how quickly the business started depending on you to hold together what the structure had not learned to carry. And this is not because the opportunity was wrong, but you had not fully priced in what it would need to support once the work became real. And you didn't price in what that gap would do once the team started seeing it from inside the work. Once they realized the business could not naturally absorb what it had committed to. And that is the judgment. You did not misread the operating standard. You misread what the direction would cause the business to become. And this is where it becomes personal for you as a leader. Because once an expansion plan gets positioned as the next logical move and then fails to fully materialize, the next direction does not start from neutral. The team remembers the gaps. They remember the escalation that kept coming upstream instead of staying distributed. And they remember the coordination that had to be forced. Even your partners remember the unevenness in delivery. The strongest people on your team remember what they had to carry to make it work. So when your next growth decision shows up, you're not just selling the opportunity. You're also selling belief back into the business. Because more proof now is required before people believe, and more hesitation has to be overcome. And that's the cost, not just in this expansion, in the credibility it takes to move the next one. The failed expansion does not just affect the next opportunity in front of you. It will change the starting point for the next one. And that's why this is never about just the opportunity. You didn't just change the market you served. You changed what the business now has to consistently support. Because this was never just about whether the opportunity existed. It was whether the business could consistently support the standards attached to the environment it entered once the work became real. Every week I break down the real strategy behind top performers for wealth advisors and leaders ready to operate to the levels we're built for. This is EliteVate. We cut through the fluff, no hype, no theory, just strategy, psychology, and execution. If this hits home, subscribe. You're not just watching and learning. You will become the model others follow.